I'm Reverend Brian Ferguson. Despite what I just did, I am the minister here. And I use the pronouns he, him, his. I've been supplanted by the table for a very important reason, so I'm actually doing the time for all ages from here. And the theme for this month that we'll be exploring in worship is finding our center. And that's a big topic. But when I really thought about it, I think finding our center, I think is quite easy in Unitarian Universalism. I mean, maybe don't always state it, but I think it is love. And I want to share a story from our tradition, which I've shared here 3 years ago, I think. But I think I'll share it again because it's one of my most important stories, and it's by one of the most important figures in our history. And it's by Hosea Ballou. And he's considered the father of Universalism, and he lived in the late 18th, early 19th century. And when he was a young child, he came from a large rural family. He lived on a farm, and he had like 7 brothers and sisters, I think mainly sisters. And of course, they lived on a farm, so they had to do lots of work, and they lived in rural New Hampshire. And so it was kind of muddy, you know. I grew up in Scotland. I know what mud is. And so, you know, we've been seeing a bit of mud around here over the last week or so. Did anyone play in it? It wasn't very playful, was it? Especially when it's in your living room. And so, but Hosea Ballou loved to play in mud. He loved to play in mud. And he played in mud, but this was way back in the 18th century. So washing the clothes wasn't easy. And it was left to the oldest sister. So any oldest sisters here can probably sympathize with this if they come from large families. And his sister would get so annoyed with him that he would be playing in the mud and she would have to wash all the clothes. So she went and talked to his father and said, "Can you stop Hosea playing in the mud?" And his father said, "Yes." So he called Hosea in and said, "Hosea, were you playing in the mud?" He said, "Yes." "You know your sister's to wash the clothes, that you get all muddy?" He said, "Yes. That's a lot of work for her. Please stop playing in the mud." And so Hosea said, okay. But one of his tasks was he used to feed the pigs. Now, anyone here fed pigs? It can be muddy, and the pigs like mud. And of course, so Hosea was doing it, and he realized, well, I fed the pigs, I'm already muddy, I can play in the mud. So Hosea played in the mud and got in, and his sister was furious. He said, "I thought I talked to your dad." So she went and talked to the dad again and said, "Look, Hosea's playing in the mud again." And so Hosea's dad called him in. He was very stern this time and said, "Did you play in the mud?" "Yes." "Did I tell you not to play in the mud?" And Hosea said, "Yeah." "And so why did you play in the mud?" And Hosea realized that he'd no real good reason. He just liked playing in the mud. And he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'll really try not to do it again." And his dad was really stern and said, "Well, please don't. This is a lot of work for your family. I'm really angry at you." And Hosea realized that. And then Hosea looked at the dad and said, "But do you still love me?" And the dad was kind of taken aback. He said, "Oh, I'm mad at you. I'm angry at you. I'm disappointed in you. But yes, I still love you." And Hosea remembered that, and that's what he really took that idea into Universalism, because fundamental to our Universalist tradition, when he became the minister and became a Universalist leader, was that he did not believe in the idea of a judgmental God. He believed in a loving God. Because even if his dad could love him when he was all muddy and he disobeyed him and he was angry with him, he thought a God would not punish us. It would not be judgmental God, and that's fundamental to Universalism, this shift from a judgmental God to a loving God. I think from the very beginning of a Universalist tradition, love has been the center of our religion, and I think it still is.
Well, as Brian mentioned, the worship theme for January is finding our center. In the William Butler Yeats poem, The Second Coming, things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And in this dark place, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. This poem was written in the aftermath of the First World War and the 1918 flu pandemic. To this dystopian vision, I say no. I believe, with conviction and passionate intensity, that the center can hold. And we each have the power to dig deep into our core and build a better tomorrow. One where we save our earth, beat back the disease of racism and hate, and come together as one nation. This happens not with a second coming, not from one person who will save us, but instead from each one of us holding true to our own values and beliefs, breathing in hope, breathing out fear, one inhalation at a time, finding our own center so that we can ground ourselves and hold fast to this earth as we stand strong, gripping tightly to hope, to peace, to our dreams of a bright future. Holding on to that dream when things go wrong, when life seems bleak, is no easy task. And when looked upon from afar, it can seem insurmountable. Like when you dump out the box of puzzle pieces and feel you will never see the entire picture. But if you take it slow, one piece at a time, sorting by color, finding the edges, slowly and slowly it comes together. You might have to step away, call a friend for help, shoo the cat off the table. But if you can just keep going, the image will be revealed. Martin Luther King, whose birthday we celebrate next week, had a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. As we venture into 2023, let us not get swept up into the darkness of despair. Let us not lose faith in our dreams. Let us instead continue the work to smooth the rough places, straighten that which is crooked, keep placing those puzzle pieces, and exalt in the belief that the center can hold if we can each commit to doing our part with both conviction and passionate intensity. Blessed be, and may it be so.
I'm a little confused. Laurie said something about loving cats. I was asking, is that like a unicorn? It's a running joke we've had for probably as long as I've known you. I like cats. I just prefer dogs. We're talking about finding our center. And today I want to talk about finding our moving center, because one of the things about Unitarian Universalism is we change. I'll be talking more about how we are changing right now, later in a few minutes. Not too much later, you'll be pleased to hear. Yeah. But one of the things is we are not stuck with scripture from 2,000 years ago as our guiding principle. We look at our lived experience and interpret it through our reason, through science, through social sciences, and try to understand it to make sense of that. We bring new knowledge into our faith on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. But having a lot of us do look for, in a religion, a grounding center. And as especially those of us who live in earthquakes, zones, you want a foundation. You don't want it to move too much. So what does it mean? How can a religion ground you if it keeps moving? And that's what I really want to explore today. And we know change is hard. We talked about change back in November. And change is hard, especially when it's enforced upon you from outside. But I think many of us are attracted to Unitarian Universalism for the freedom to change our minds, to expose ourselves to new worldviews, to new experiences, to new values. And back about 20 years ago, our UUA president at the time, Reverend Bill Singford, said that we really needed to reclaim a language of reverence. And he did this because he was in the hospital with his son and struggled that maybe we didn't have the information, maybe we didn't have the faith that really helped us in these really tough times. And he said that no one wants to hear the 7 principles in the deathbed. My counter to that is I don't think people want to hear the 10 commandments in their deathbed either. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's wife has got very little relevance to you when you're on your deathbed. But what do we have in our faith that does help us there? The poetry, the music, the relationships we have with one another. And I would say the love that we experience in our community is what sustains us. We are a religion of shared values and differing beliefs. And I think much of the focus in what we do here within Unitarian Universalism and within here at UUFRC is we try and gain a deeper understanding of those values and how we can aspire to live them better on a daily basis in our life. We maybe want a deeper exploration of what is God, what is sacred, what is the divine in our life. And perhaps we just want a greater understanding of ourselves and the human condition. The Jewish philosopher Martin Buber said, the real beginning of community is when its members have a common relation to a center overriding all other relations. The circle is described by the radii, not the circumference. Described by the radii, our relationship to the center. So what is at the center of Unitarian Universalism? I think many of us have got a lot of meaning from the 7 principles, and I know I have. It's been important to me in my life and my ministry. But I also had an intern supervisor who called them the 7 banalities. He was not a fan. And I didn't agree with him. And we had some discussions about that. It's always good to argue with a supervisor. And I felt we didn't take them deeply enough. And could you put up the slide of the 7 principles now? Just for those, it's in your order of service, but for those online, I'd like to do it. I think our problem is we don't take them deeply enough. Like the first principle, what do we mean by inherent when we talk about the inherent worth and dignity of every person? What do we mean by responsible and the free and responsible search for truth and meaning in the 4th principle? Yeah, we've got the free search, we value that, but what do we mean by a responsible search? A responsible search means you cannot believe anything you want to believe. And the 5th one is the right of conscience in the democratic process. What do we mean by that right of conscience? I think we need to take the 7 principles deeper. It's not that they're banal, it's just that we don't take them deeply enough and what they mean in our lives. I'm going to talk about bylaws. And I know you're all excited. I can see your eyes glazing over right now. But I'm used to people glazing over when I talk to them. So, Article 2 of our UUA bylaws has the 7 principles and the 6 purposes. They're part of our larger association's bylaws. These values, these principles in there. And there's a discussion going on right now to change them. They've been around for almost 40 years. And I don't want to go into the whole history, I don't have time right now, but they actually really were a result of the work of the women's movement within Unitarian Universalism to address the sexism they saw in the previous principles. And then they became adopted in 1985 by the whole association. But they're part of our bylaws. And we're looking to change them. And I'm a fan because any of you who have attended my UU Values and history class know that I've got some problems with the principles, because I think they're more ethical guidelines than spiritual or religious guidance. And there's nothing about love in them. Nothing about love in those. They're ethical guidelines. You can take those down now, thanks. But if you look at the order of service, for those of you who picked them up, there's a diagram there. And I'm going to send out a document later. It's a 3-page document, and in the back page of the order of service, you'll see the Article 2 of the bylaws. So this is what they're proposing, and they put love at the center of this. And the way it's described is that love is the enduring force that holds us all together. Love inspires and powers the passion with which we embody our values, inseparable from one another. These shared values are justice, generosity, evolution, pluralism, equity, and interdependence. So I'm sorry to Laurie and Nora, because I know you signed on for the principles, but we're just about to change all that. The rest of you even got to live with them. Now, this is a draft proposal right now, but I really like this because it puts love at the center of this. And it carries a lot of what we love, the interdependence, the pluralism, the judgment, the interdependence, the justice forward as well. Now, for each of these statements, and I'll send at the back page, you'll see there's a sentence and a couple, in 2 sentences of a covenant of the promises we make. I want you to really absorb it. I know the first thing when something changes that we like is to react against it. Sit with it, reflect on it. We're going to have discussions, and I'm going to be preaching about each of those 6 additional values. Love is the topic for February, the worship topic. But we'll be exploring these other values in the next 6 months through the rest of the year. But really reflect, how can we live into this in a meaningful way? Because I think this is a far more religious path than the 7 principles. I think the 7 principles are really more ethical guidelines. Can you go to the next slide? And these are the statements. I just shortened it to the 1-sentence part. And if you just look at what these are saying, it says, justice, we work to build diverse, multicultural, beloved community where all people thrive. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope for generosity. Evolution, we adapt to a changing world. Pluralism, we celebrate that all sacred beings, diverse in culture, theology, and experience. In equity, we declare that every person has a right to flourish with dignity and worthiness. And interdependence, we honor the sacred independence web of all existence with humility. We understand our place in the web. I think this is really powerful religious, spiritual language. It's grounding its values. We keep talking about being a community of shared values and differing beliefs. It's stating the values of what we are. I think this could be a really powerful time for our movement. Now, one of the first questions I got was, what do we mean by love? And I invite you to think about that, but don't answer it with a definition. You think, how did Jesus answer questions? I'm going to say, what would Jesus do? It's pretty funny for a non-Christian, but if what he actually did, he would answer with stories. He would answer with a story. When he was asked, when he talked about love thy neighbor as thyself, and the smart lawyer in the room said, what do you mean by neighbor? He answered with the story of the Good Samaritan. That was in response to the question, who is the neighbor? And at the end of it, he said, who was that man's neighbor? And the answer the lawyer gave was, the one who showed him mercy. So that's what I invite you to do. What are your stories of love that you've experienced in this community? What are your stories of love as an individual, as a community? And how has it driven you to action? What are your stories of generosity? What are your stories of interdependence? Look at each of these values. We, as Unitarian Universalists, need to build up a cadre of stories, not definitions. No one wants to hear a definition in their deathbed either. They want stories, they want beauty, they want poetry, they want emotions lifted up. I just want to share one story to give an example of this. You're all very probably familiar with the Standing on the Side of Love campaign, which became the Answering the Call of Love campaign, which became the Side with Love campaign. And a lot of that change was because of the ableist language of standing. And I understand the ableist attitude, and I also acknowledge that it lost some of its power, I think, from standing on the side of love to side with love. But back in 2010, in Arizona, SB 1070, the anti-immigration law, came in. And Unitarian Universalists went in protest, and our current UUA president, Reverend Frederick Ray, was the minister in Arizona at the time and took an active role in opposing the SB 1070 because there was a lot of anti-immigrant and discriminatory laws to people of the Latino community. And Peter Morales, our president of the UUA, was down there at the time. And I heard this story from a good friend of mine who was there, and someone, we were all wearing a Standing on the Side of Love t-shirts, the yellow t-shirts that we've all had, and people were getting arrested, both our president and Susan Frederick Ray, our current president, who was the minister there, both got arrested by the police there. But they were all wearing the Standing on the Side of Love, and we think we were warriors of justice. But one of my friends heard someone passing by saying, "Why are they arresting a baseball team?" Because those yellow t-shirts are quite distinctive. But the other thing that happened that same time was a newspaper reporter was asked, "Would you like to talk to Peter Morales, the president of the UUA, or the Unitarian Universalist Association?" And the reporter said, "No, not really." And he said, "No, he's the leader of the love people." "Oh, I want to interview him." Because they were known as the love people. And they were acting out, they were getting arrested out of love for neighbor. Wouldn't we like to be known as the love people in Redwood City and San Mateo County? Because, as Cornel West said, justice is what love looks like in public. Justice is what love looks like in public. So yes, we do want love at the center. We want more stories like being the love people in Phoenix at the time. You look at the work we've done with the LGBTQ community around marriage equality. That's how the Standing on the Side of Love campaign started. So I think moving love to the center is really powerful, and it's always troubled me that our 7 principles never had love at the center. Every Sunday I talk about love. I've only got one sermon in me. I've tried to find 1,000 ways to say it, but it's about, can we bring more love into the world? Can we love ourselves? Can we love each other? And can we love the planet that we live in? Because that is fundamentally who we are. That is the relationship that is most important to us, our ability to love others. And Martin Buber, who I quoted earlier, he used to say that the sacred was the encounter between I and thou. That space in between is divine, is sacred.